Okay, right, I'm just warning you, I have no idea how this thing works.
You click right to go right.
I click right to go right.
Hey!
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about plants, and basically, I want you to think, when you leave here, that plants are the coolest thing ever. With a pen. Enthusiasm. Okay? So, hands up, who's ever seen a plant?
I think I have.
You think you have, that's always a good start. Okay, now, just to prove how sad I am, this is my favourite plant. It's called an eryngium. It's a sea holly, and it lives by the sea. It was quite common in Britain up until about the 50s, but because you can make sweets out of the roots, everybody dug them up, and that's next to none. But this one's actually my favourite variety. It's called Peter's Anthus. So, as it is my birthday, shops are still open. If anybody fancies a last-minute present, one of these. Okay. Now, I've always been interested in plants a bit, but I got a job at Trenton Garden Centre. Probably won't know it, but it's right next to Trenton Monkey Forest.
Oh, now I do.
There we go.
And this is the place that I worked. I used to work over the bridge, obviously, and I used to work on hardy nursery. And the reason it's called hardy is because all the plants are hardy. The definition is basically they can survive a winter in Britain outside. Although we did kill quite a few banana trees once. But anyway, this is where I worked, and it's not a very good picture with a projector, but that tree there, I'm sure you appreciate me shooting it, is actually a Scoia'dendron giganteum, which is the giant redwood. It's only about 100 years old, so it's only about 100 feet high. Now, over there, this is the lamppost, which tells you where everything is. Rosies are actually over this side, not that side, but I did actually fall in that river once or twice. Anyway, so this is the structure of a leaf. Well done to people who guessed it. Now I'm going to have to look at this point. Now, the difference between plants and animals that everyone will generally get is that plants make their own food and are green, which is to do with the fact that they have chlorophyll. Most of the chlorophyll is actually in this spongy mesophyll layer. Oops, dying. Okay, it's died. Which is this bit right here, and it's absolutely chock full of things called chloroplasts, which do a lot of complicated chemical processes to take sunlight, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and make oxygen and glucose, which is basically sugar, which everybody needs. After it's produced all the glucose and stuff, it gets transported through the bundle sheath and into the vein, and that gets taken off down the plant and distributed everywhere else. The guard cells and the lower epidermis allow all the carbon dioxide to enter and the oxygen to leave. Right, a simple mechanism actually. This is just a diagram that shows sort of the evolution of plants, just in case you didn't really know. And just one thing that I want to point out on here is just how amazing plants are. I mean, when plants left the sea, they were algae and they became things like mosses, liverworts and hornworts. And that was about 450 million years ago. But just think how many animals have remained pretty much unchanged for the past 450 million years. I mean, I wasn't a paleontologist, I can't think of any really. Aside from maybe fish, but anyway. After that, they became vascular plants, which basically means that they have a transport system, hence the veins, which we saw in the last slide, and that branches off the ferns. After that, they evolved seeds, and this is sort of where the distinction, where this diagram fails, but I couldn't find a better one, between conifers, sort of gymnosperms, such as ginkgos, which you can see just outside the university, and all sorts of pine trees and different things, and flowering plants, which are your bog standard everyday roses and everything like that. And the seed is actually a really, really, really important evolutionary trend in plants, because it allowed plants to move away from the water. Because if you imagine a seed, it's really hard and it avoids drying up. Whereas everything else, the mosses and the ferns, whenever you see them today, they're always in dark, damp conditions. That's quite amazing. This diagram is actually one that describes plant parasites, but it demonstrates as well the sort of evolutionary things the evolutionary trends of plants and when they evolved. This one here, the pteridophytes, are the ferns, and the conifers, cycads and ginkgos are the gymnosperms again. And you can see that they sort of quite level until flowering plants evolved, which are roses and magnolias and things like that. And angiosperms are that successful, flowering plants, that successful, that everything else sort of declines when they take over. Now I'm just going to go through 3 plants, well, slightly more than 3, but of just plants that really, to me, emphasise why plants are this amazing thing that everybody should have, apart from the fact that they make the oxygen that we breathe. This plant here, I'm not even going to attempt to embarrass myself saying that name, but this one is the Darwin orchid, a species that was discovered in Madagascar and was sent to Darwin, and they asked him, why would it evolve like this? How would it become like this? And he said that there would be a moth that had a really, really long mouth part, proboscis, that would pollinate it, because this great long thing here is actually a pollen tube, so the pollen's right at the bottom of that. And everybody laughed at him because they thought, well, nothing like that's going to be found or anything. But 150 years later, they find this moth. I was looking again. They find this moth with a really, really long mouthpiece that can reach right down to the bottom and hence pollinate it. And without one, the other would not evolve, and without one, the other could not survive. So it just shows how the co-evolution of plants and animals being 2 completely different methods of life. One is completely immobile, but the other one runs around. One can make its own food, the other one relies on something else to make its own food. Just how the 2 can interact and produce something quite nice. Okay, this one, I have to say this is the best birthday present I've ever had. It was exactly like this, but these are coniferous plants. You've got Venus flytraps here, you've got some sticky ones that, and it's dying again, sticky ones there, and there's big things at the back that look like trumpets and pitch plants, and they secrete all pheromones and a nice scent, and flies just drop in. The reason I picked carnivorous plants is they're not strictly carnivorous. They live in environments where there is very, very little nutrients in the soil, i.e. in bogs, where bacteria just cannot survive, so none of the nutrients are broken down. And they really struggle to get, or they would struggle to get, nitrates and specific kinds of sulfur in that. So the method that they have got for doing this is they actually catch insects. And just imagine a non-moving thing catching something that we can't catch when we try to swat a fly, which is really, really difficult. Yet these things, they can't move, they manage it. And it just shows just how sort of special and intricate, not intricate, but not intimate, I can't think of the right word, but it's really, really focused how their evolution is. And the last one is this. Again, I only found out about this about last year or something. And this is an entire grove of quaking aspen trees, also called Populus tremulans, something like this. And this entire grove is in Utah, and it is entitled Pando, which means I spread. Now you're looking at this, you think, oh, it's just a bog standard forest, but actually this, all of that is one organism. All of them trees are the same plant. And it goes on for a very, very long expanse. It's an entire forest made of the same organism. Now these things are very old. I think the average age is about 130 years old. And each that's how old one of these individual shoots are. But the reason that it's so special is because the root system is what all connects it. And all of these are genetically identical. And this entire organism, which is connected by the roots, it is by far the heaviest organism on the planet, but it's also estimated to be anywhere between 80,000 years old and 1 million years old. And I don't know how to work that one out, but experts are experts. And so just think, this plant that you cut down for your firewood, you burn for your charcoal, you eat, I mean aspen trees, you can make paracetamol out of. Things like that were around and making the oxygen that we thousands of years before our species even existed. thank you, and I hope plants are now very interesting to you.
So we do have time for a few questions for Nigel. We'll start with Catherine.
It's one question, but plant means children in Welsh.
Really? I never knew that.
Right. Any actual questions? Zach?
Do you think on the whole that mankind respects plants enough?
Yes and no. I mean, plants are given sort of, excuse me, I mean, it's Valentine's Day on Friday, I think, and what's everybody going to give everybody? Chocolates comes from a plant, and flowers, again, comes from a plant. So in certain aspects, I think plants are romanticised, used loosely, and they're given sort of a higher sort of standing than other animals. I mean, this entire, well, most of this building is made out of wood, which again comes from plants. And we do value them for their resources, but I don't think the plants themselves, because they don't move, they don't have brains, they don't have eyes, they don't have ears, they're just not treated the same. You'll never hear anybody ever talk about plants' rights. The animal rights are everywhere. I'm not saying that plants should have rights, but it's just not, people don't see them as the same, they don't see them as life. I mean, nobody really thought about digging a weed up, but everybody would moan if you shot a dog on the street. Sorry, I was reading a strange article before. Yes.
Going on from that, do plants then have intrinsic value in themselves, or do they have value because they provide oxygen, they get the price, or for some other reason?
They do have value. I mean, without them, we wouldn't be here, full stop. And they're very valuable in terms of the resources. But also, I think they can also be quite, I mean, obviously I was a gardener, so I know for the fact that everybody buys them to look nice. And that is quite a value that people place on plants. They have value. It just depends on what sort of plants will define what sort of value they have. It's like a great tree. It might be very, very good for wood. It might have an actual sale value, I don't know, about £100 a tree, I don't know. But you wouldn't think that you would sell that because you want it in your garden, just because it looks nice. So you wouldn't just have that there because, well, some people would, but you just wouldn't have it there because it looks nice. I think that's what you were.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Anyone?
We go with.
Next.
We'll start at the back and move way forward. So
I was wondering how you said that plant animals and plants have like a role together, but now is that role? Do you think the role is changing with the GM crops and that sort of stuff?
I mean, I'm going to avoid getting into the whole GM discussion, but quite frankly, the population's growing. Nobody wants to say, right, we can't feed the people we have now, so let's just stop having kids. Nobody's ever going to say that. So I do think that we will be driving plants to have GM, be genetically modified, because that is the only way that we're going to feed people. End of. We do, I mean, wheat is, modern day wheat is a bunch of evolutions and crossbreeds between different things which are completely random. However, we have taken them and selected them because they have certain traits that we want. And so we have now made that the dominant variety of grass on the planet. But we also have the effect that humans are the first species ever to affect their environment as much as the environment affects them. So I think that we're going to have quite a few repercussions of how we're making plants evolve. Though I'm not expecting any man-eating plants to sprout up and kill us all yet. Unless GM goes completely wrong. But yeah, that's not going to happen.
we had a question from Milby?
Do you think that, this might be outside your remit, apologies if it is, do you think that we're going to be at a point, at some point soon, or maybe even already there, where we are chopping down too quickly, we're not at an equilibrium where we're putting things back, we're not getting enough oxygen back, we're not dumping enough carbon back in? we're putting too much value on their, on the economics of it, on the land they give us, and the wood that we can use.
That's it's an interesting point. I mean, we are I don't know the exact figures. I can't say we're cutting down more trees than we're planting, or we're planting more trees than we're cutting down. But the way that we're going is we've reached a point where we realise that we are burning coal, producing too much CO2, not having, well, maybe not having not enough oxygen, having too much CO2. And people are realising that one of the easiest ways is to let plants do what plants do. So, excuse me. So I think what is going to happen is we're going to end up maybe not so much planting more trees, but looking at more for microorganisms such as algae, because I think it's something like a third of the oxygen produced comes from algae, and I think a third comes from the Arctic Circle belt, I can't think of the name, high foliage just around the Arctic Circle. So I think the trees might play less of a role, and algae, which people wouldn't define as plants, but still have chlorophyll.
No, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
They might, which means they'll produce do exactly the same as the things trees do, but they will take the carbon dioxide and that. But I think we're going. I don't think there'll be a biological answer. I don't think this CO2 and oxygen will be a biological answer. I think it will be something more. Here's a machine going to carbon capture it. We're going to stick it in a rock under the ground and just ignore it until we need that rock. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know too much about that.
I'm afraid, no, I'm afraid that is all we have time for. So we can have one last round of applause for Nigel.